When a man contacts you, one of the most critical mistakes you can make is reacting emotionally without assessing the situation. Emotional overreaction often stems from an overwhelming desire to address the moment without fully processing the implications. This reaction might be rooted in excitement, fear, anger, or even a mix of these feelings. Regardless of the motivation, responding impulsively can compromise the balance of power in the interaction and potentially set a tone you didn't intend to establish. Imagine receiving a text, call, or message that immediately stirs a strong emotional response. Perhaps it's from someone you've been waiting to hear from, or maybe it's someone whose contact you least expected. In that fleeting moment, your emotions might take over, prompting you to reply with excitement, anxiety, or even frustration. The temptation to immediately engage and express your feelings can be overpowering, but this is precisely where caution is needed. Your initial response sets the foundation for the entire exchange. If you act out of emotion, you may inadvertently reveal too much about your internal state, whether it's eagerness, insecurity, or resentment. When emotions are in control, rational thought often takes a back seat. You might find yourself typing out lengthy responses, expressing feelings you didn't mean to share, or even questioning the other person's intentions before understanding the context of their outreach. This kind of behavior can come across as ungrounded, creating a perception that you are easily swayed or too invested in the outcome of the conversation. For example, imagine a scenario where a man you haven't heard from in weeks suddenly reaches out. Your initial reaction might be anger mixed with relief. If you respond with accusations like, "Why haven't you contacted me all this time?" or overly enthusiastic replies like, "I was waiting for you to text me," you've immediately given away your emotional leverage. Furthermore, emotional overreaction doesn't just affect the tone of the conversation, it also influences the way you're perceived. People are naturally drawn to those who exude calmness, self-assurance, and control. When you respond emotionally, it may signal that you lack these qualities. For instance, an impulsive reaction might make you seem needy or unpredictable, characteristics that can be unattractive and diminish the respect the other person has for you. By contrast, maintaining a composed demeanor conveys strength and independence. It shows that while you may value their contact, your sense of worth isn't dictated by their actions. Another significant aspect to consider is that emotional reactions often lead to regret. When emotions run high, you might say or do things that you wouldn't under normal circumstances. Afterward, once the initial intensity subsides, you might look back and wish you had handled the situation differently. This is especially true if your reaction was fueled by negative emotions like anger or frustration. For instance, sending a string of emotionally charged messages might make you feel momentarily justified, but later you may realize it wasn't the most effective way to communicate your feelings or intentions. Additionally, when you react emotionally, you might inadvertently hand over control of the interaction. The other person can easily gauge how invested or affected you are, which can influence how they proceed. If a man realizes that his contact has triggered a strong emotional response in you, he might interpret this as a sign that he holds significant power in your life. This perception can shift the dynamic of the relationship, often not in your favor. Even if his intentions were genuine at the start, seeing such a reaction might make him feel he has the upper hand, which could lead to less effort or respect on his part. It's also worth noting that emotional overreactions can cloud your judgment. When you're caught up in a whirlwind of feelings, it becomes harder to discern the true purpose or intent behind the contact. You might focus more on satisfying your immediate emotional needs rather than taking a step back to evaluate the situation objectively. For example, if a man contacts you after a period of silence, your emotions might compel you to engage deeply right away, seeking closure or reassurance. However, without clarity on his motives, you risk walking into a situation unprepared. Moreover, overreacting emotionally can make the conversation about your feelings rather than the situation at hand. While expressing emotions has its place, it's important to do so thoughtfully and strategically. Leading with emotion can overwhelm the other person and derail the conversation before it even begins. It can also make it harder to establish a meaningful dialogue as the focus shifts to calming or addressing your emotional state rather than engaging in a balanced and constructive exchange. In any interaction, balance is key. An emotional response tips the scales, often to your disadvantage. The ability to remain calm, composed, and in control not only empowers you, but also creates a space where the other person feels compelled to approach the interaction with a similar level of respect and seriousness. Emotions are powerful, but they must be managed carefully, especially in situations where the stakes are high and the outcomes matter deeply to you. When a man contacts you, one of the most crucial principles to uphold is ensuring that you do not immediately prioritize his needs over your own. This mistake, though often made with the best intentions, can send a clear message that your personal boundaries and priorities are secondary. The instant you allow someone else's demands, schedule, or expectations to take precedence over your own life, you begin to erode the balance necessary for mutual respect and healthy interaction. It's natural to want to be accommodating, especially when someone's contact feels significant or long-awaited. You may feel an urge to rearrange your plans, adjust your time, or even abandon your current activities to engage with them fully. While this might appear considerate on the surface, it inadvertently signals that you are willing to sacrifice your own priorities and, by extension, your independence. This can set an unhealthy precedent, where the other person learns to expect that their needs will always come first, regardless of the situation. Consider what happens when you receive a message or call while you're in the middle of something important, whether it's work, a personal project, or simply taking time for yourself. If you immediately drop what you're doing to respond, you communicate that their contact is more important than your current focus. Over time, this behavior can lead to a dynamic where your time and energy are taken for granted. The other person might not consciously exploit this willingness, but they may subconsciously begin to value your availability more than your individuality. Furthermore, prioritizing someone else's needs over your own can create an internal imbalance. When you constantly put others first, you risk neglecting your personal growth, well-being, and sense of self-worth. This dynamic can be particularly harmful in relationships where one person consistently accommodates while the other takes without reciprocating. Over time, this pattern leads to resentment and burnout, as the accommodating person feels increasingly undervalued and unfulfilled. Maintaining a sense of balance and self-respect starts with ensuring that your own needs are not perpetually sidelined. Another aspect to consider is the psychological impact of being overly accommodating. People often respect those who respect themselves. When you demonstrate that your time, boundaries, and priorities are non-negotiable, you exude confidence and self-assurance. On the other hand, if you constantly adjust to fit someone else's needs, it can give the impression that you lack these qualities. This doesn't mean you should be inflexible or unkind, but rather that your willingness to accommodate should come from a place of intention and choice, not compulsion or fear of rejection. When a man contacts you, it's essential to assess the situation objectively. Ask yourself, does this request or interaction align with your current plans or priorities? Is there a genuine need to respond immediately, or can it wait until a more convenient time? These questions are not about dismissing the other person, but about ensuring that your own life remains centered and intact. For instance, if you're in the middle of something that requires your full attention, it's perfectly acceptable to delay your response until you're in a better position to engage. This approach not only preserves your focus, but also establishes that your time is valuable. It's also important to recognize that immediate prioritization can sometimes lead to enabling behavior. If someone learns that you will always make yourself available to them, they may begin to rely on this without making an effort to meet you halfway. This can lead to a one-sided dynamic where your flexibility becomes an unspoken expectation. By maintaining your boundaries and ensuring that your own needs are met first, you encourage a more balanced and respectful relationship. In some cases, prioritizing yourself might feel uncomfortable, especially if you've been conditioned to place others' needs above your own. This mindset often stems from a fear of being perceived as selfish or uncaring. However, it's important to understand that prioritizing your own well-being is not a rejection of others, but rather an affirmation of your self-worth. When you take care of yourself first, you are better equipped to engage with others in a meaningful and balanced way. Another critical point to consider is how this behavior impacts your long-term self-esteem. When you consistently set aside your own needs to accommodate someone else, you may begin to feel as though your time and priorities are less important. This belief can become internalized, leading to a diminished sense of self-worth. By contrast, when you honor your own commitments and boundaries, you reinforce the idea that you are valuable and deserving of respect. This not only benefits your relationships, but also strengthens your overall sense of self. Finally, it's worth examining how this principle applies to the broader context of your life. When you prioritize yourself, you set a standard for how you expect to be treated, not just by one person, but by everyone in your life. This standard acts as a filter, attracting those who respect your boundaries and deterring those who do not. It also creates a sense of consistency and stability in your interactions, as people come to understand that your time and energy are not freely given but thoughtfully shared. Prioritizing your own needs doesn't mean neglecting others or being unresponsive. It means recognizing that your well-being, goals, and commitments are just as important as anyone else's. By maintaining this balance, you create a foundation for healthier, more fulfilling interactions where both parties feel valued and respected. When a man contacts you, one of the most damaging mistakes you can make is assuming his intentions without first understanding the true purpose of his outreach. This tendency to jump to conclusions often stems from a mixture of past experiences, personal insecurities, or even hopeful expectations. However, operating on assumptions can lead to miscommunication, unnecessary emotional investment, and potential disappointment. It's essential to approach such situations with a mindset rooted in curiosity and discernment rather than premature conclusions. Imagine you receive a message from someone you've been interested in and you immediately interpret it as a sign of romantic interest or rekindled affection. Without clarification, you might begin to construct a narrative that aligns with your desires or fears. This narrative can cloud your judgment, causing you to respond in ways that may not align with the reality of the situation. For instance, assuming that a man's message means he wants to reconnect or rekindle a relationship might lead you to engage emotionally without verifying his true intentions. If his outreach turns out to be casual or unrelated to your assumptions, you risk feeling disappointed or even betrayed. Assumptions can also create unnecessary tension in interactions. For example, if you assume that his contact is motivated by guilt, manipulation, or ulterior motives, you may respond defensively or with skepticism. This can set a negative tone for the conversation, even if his intentions were entirely neutral or genuine. On the flip side, assuming his outreach is purely positive or benevolent might make you overly trusting, leaving you vulnerable to potential manipulation. Striking a balance between openness and caution requires that you take the time to fully understand his reasons for reaching out before reacting. Another pitfall of assuming intentions is that it limits the depth and authenticity of your communication. When you operate under preconceived notions, you're less likely to ask meaningful questions or explore the true context of his message. Instead, your responses may be shaped by the story you've created in your mind rather than the reality of the situation. This can lead to missed opportunities for genuine connection or resolution. For instance, if a man reaches out after a long period of silence, you might assume he's trying to apologize or explain himself. However, his actual motivation might be unrelated, such as seeking advice, offering assistance, or simply checking in. Without asking for clarification, you risk misinterpreting the situation entirely. Additionally, assumptions can often stem from projecting your own feelings onto the other person. If you've been thinking about him frequently or harbor unresolved emotions, you might interpret his contact as a reflection of those feelings. This projection can create a feedback loop where your assumptions fuel your responses, which in turn reinforce your narrative. Breaking free from this cycle requires self-awareness and a willingness to separate your emotions from the situation at hand. By doing so, you can approach the interaction with a clearer perspective and avoid unnecessary confusion or hurt. Assuming intentions can also lead to overanalyzing every detail of the contact. You might find yourself dissecting the timing, wording, or tone of his message, searching for hidden meanings or clues. While it's natural to want to understand the context of his outreach, overanalyzing can quickly spiral into paranoia or unrealistic expectations. For instance, interpreting a simple "how have you been?" as a sign of deep regret or a desire to reconcile can lead to actions or responses that are out of sync with reality. Instead of speculating, it's more productive to engage directly and seek clarity. Moreover, operating on assumptions can cause you to ignore important red flags or overlook subtle signs that might reveal his true intentions. If you're too focused on confirming your own narrative, you might miss critical cues in his behavior, language, or actions. For example, if you assume his contact is driven by genuine care, you might disregard signs that suggest otherwise, such as vague responses, inconsistent communication, or a lack of follow-through. Similarly, if you assume his intentions are purely negative, you might dismiss efforts on his part to build trust or establish meaningful dialogue. Taking the time to understand his intentions also allows you to establish and maintain healthy boundaries. When you assume, you risk responding prematurely, which can lead to overcommitment or emotional entanglement. On the other hand, seeking clarity gives you the space to assess whether the interaction aligns with your values and goals. For example, if his contact is motivated by convenience or self-interest, you'll be better equipped to protect your energy and avoid unnecessary involvement. Conversely, if his intentions are sincere, you can engage with confidence, knowing that you've approached the situation thoughtfully. Approaching the interaction with an open but discerning mindset helps you remain in control of your emotions and reactions. It allows you to gather information, ask questions, and evaluate the situation based on facts rather than assumptions. This approach not only fosters healthier communication, but also empowers you to make decisions that prioritize your well-being. Instead of reacting impulsively or emotionally, you can respond from a place of strength and clarity, ensuring that your actions align with your intentions. Ultimately, assuming intentions can create a disconnect between your perception and reality. By resisting the urge to jump to conclusions, you give yourself the opportunity to navigate the situation with wisdom and grace. Taking the time to understand the other person's motives ensures that your responses are thoughtful, measured, and aligned with your values, leading to more authentic and meaningful interactions. When a man contacts you, one of the most common and significant mistakes you can make is over-explaining yourself. This tendency to provide excessive details or justify your actions, thoughts, or feelings stems from a desire to be understood, accepted, or validated. While this urge is natural, over-explaining can undermine your position, erode your confidence, and even create a dynamic where your value is questioned. Maintaining composure and communicating with clarity and brevity is far more powerful than indulging in an exhaustive explanation. Over-explaining often arises from a subconscious fear of being misunderstood or judged. You may feel the need to account for every decision you've made, to fill in every perceived gap in the conversation, or to ensure that your perspective is fully recognized. However, this approach often has the opposite effect. Instead of clarifying your position, over-explaining can make you appear uncertain or defensive. For example, if you decline an invitation and then follow up with a lengthy justification involving your schedule, commitments, and personal reasons, it may signal that you're seeking approval for your decision rather than simply asserting it. This unnecessary elaboration can dilute the strength of your response. Another issue with over-explaining is that it shifts the focus of the conversation away from the primary message. The more details you provide, the more opportunities you create for the other person to misinterpret or challenge your points. For instance, if a man asks why you didn't respond to his message immediately, a simple explanation like, "I was busy," is often sufficient. However, if you delve into a detailed recount of your day, explaining every task you completed and why each one took precedence, you open the door for him to question or invalidate your priorities. This dynamic places you in a position of having to defend yourself rather than standing firm in your initial response. Over-explaining can also unintentionally convey a lack of confidence. When you feel the need to justify your actions excessively, it may suggest that you doubt their validity. This perception can weaken your stance and give the other person an upper hand in the interaction. Confidence is communicated not only through what you say, but also through how you say it. A concise, clear response signals that you are secure in your choices and do not feel the need to seek external validation. On the other hand, an over-explained response can come across as seeking approval, which diminishes the impact of your words. Another consequence of over-explaining is that it can blur your boundaries. When you provide too much information, you may inadvertently invite others to question, critique, or even overstep your limits. For example, if you're unavailable to meet and respond with a lengthy explanation about your workload, personal commitments, and future availability, you may find yourself subjected to negotiation or pressure. The other person might try to persuade you to rearrange your schedule or prioritize their requests based on the details you shared. A simple, firm response like "I'm unavailable" leaves less room for such manipulation and reinforces your boundaries. Over-explaining can also be emotionally exhausting. Pouring out details in an attempt to justify yourself often involves revisiting and analyzing situations that don't need such scrutiny. This can lead to feelings of frustration or anxiety, especially if the other person reacts dismissively or critically. By keeping your responses concise, you conserve your emotional energy and maintain control over the narrative. You are not obligated to share every aspect of your thought process or decision-making. Sometimes less truly is more. The habit of over-explaining is often rooted in people-pleasing tendencies. If you're accustomed to prioritizing others' comfort or approval, you may feel compelled to provide exhaustive justifications for your actions. However, this approach is not sustainable or healthy. It places the weight of the interaction on your shoulders, as though it's your responsibility to ensure that the other person fully understands or agrees with your perspective. Shifting this mindset requires recognizing that your worth is not determined by how well you explain yourself or how much someone else agrees with you. Over-explaining can also erode trust in your instincts. The more you second-guess yourself in an effort to explain, the further you distance yourself from your inner sense of clarity and purpose. Trusting yourself means accepting that not every decision or action needs to be dissected or justified. It's about embracing the confidence that your choices are valid, even if they are not fully understood by others. When you over-explain, you risk diminishing your own sense of conviction and allowing external opinions to hold undue influence. Furthermore, over-explaining can unintentionally disrupt the balance of power in a conversation. When you provide more information than necessary, you may inadvertently place yourself in a subordinate position, as though you're seeking permission or approval. This dynamic can create an imbalance, especially if the other person begins to expect or demand such explanations in future interactions. By keeping your communication concise and focused, you establish a tone of mutual respect and equality where your words are valued without the need for excessive elaboration. Over-explaining can also detract from your ability to listen and engage effectively. When you're focused on justifying yourself, you may miss important cues or insights from the other person. Effective communication is a two-way street, and listening is just as important as speaking. By keeping your responses succinct, you create space for the other person to share their thoughts and feelings, fostering a more balanced and meaningful exchange. Ultimately, avoiding the tendency to over-explain is about reclaiming your sense of authority and confidence in your interactions. It's about recognizing that your words and choices hold weight, even without extensive justification. By trusting yourself and maintaining clarity in your communication, you empower yourself to engage with others from a position of strength and self-assurance. When a man contacts you, responding immediately can seem like a logical choice, especially if you want to appear polite, attentive, or eager to engage. However, this behavior can inadvertently convey the wrong message about your availability, priorities, and self-respect. The eagerness to respond right away might create an impression that you are constantly waiting for his attention, or that his outreach holds a higher priority than your own commitments. While responding promptly may sometimes be appropriate, making it a habit can unintentionally diminish your value in the relationship dynamic. When you immediately respond to messages, it sets a precedent for the interaction. The man may come to expect instant responses as a norm, viewing your attentiveness as a given rather than a privilege. This diminishes the sense of effort or appreciation for your time. In relationships, balance is crucial, and part of maintaining that balance is establishing that your time is valuable and not always readily available. Delaying your response even slightly introduces a sense of unpredictability that can help sustain interest and intrigue. This doesn't mean playing games or deliberately being unavailable, but rather allowing your natural priorities to dictate the pace of your interactions. Immediate responses can also convey a lack of independence. When you prioritize replying over whatever else you may be doing, it can suggest that you don't have much going on in your life. This can unintentionally lower the man's perception of your self-worth. People are naturally drawn to those who exude confidence and have fulfilling lives outside of their relationships. Showing that you have your own schedule, responsibilities, and interests reinforces the idea that your time and attention are valuable commodities, not things you dispense without consideration. There's also a psychological component to delayed responses that plays a significant role in human behavior. When something is readily available without effort, it can lose its perceived value. This principle applies to communication as well. If your responses are always immediate, the man may begin to take your attention for granted, assuming that you will always be there no matter the circumstances. On the other hand, when there's a slight delay, it creates a moment of anticipation, making your reply feel more meaningful. That anticipation can build curiosity and a deeper appreciation for your interaction. Responding immediately may also put undue pressure on yourself to maintain that level of availability consistently. Life is unpredictable, and there will be times when you genuinely cannot respond right away. If you've established a pattern of immediate replies, any deviation from that norm may lead to questions, misunderstandings, or even conflict. By setting a more relaxed pace for communication from the start, you allow for greater flexibility and reduce the likelihood of unnecessary tension in the future. Additionally, taking your time to respond allows you to craft a thoughtful reply. When you respond immediately, there's a tendency to react rather than reflect. This can lead to impulsive or emotionally charged responses that you might later regret. Pausing before you reply gives you an opportunity to consider the tone, content, and implications of your message. It allows you to communicate with intention, ensuring that your words align with your values and desired outcome for the interaction. Thoughtful communication not only strengthens your position, but also fosters a deeper and more meaningful connection. Another reason to avoid immediate responses is to protect your emotional energy. Constantly being available for someone else's needs can be draining, especially if it comes at the expense of your own well-being. By establishing boundaries around your availability, you signal that you prioritize your own needs and that you expect the same respect in return. This sets a healthy foundation for any relationship, ensuring that it is built on mutual respect rather than one-sided efforts. Responding immediately can also create an imbalance in the power dynamic of the relationship. When you consistently make yourself available on his terms, it gives him control over the pace and flow of your interactions. By taking control of your response time, you assert your independence and autonomy. This shift in dynamics encourages mutual respect and ensures that both parties contribute equally to the relationship. It's important to remember that communication should be a shared responsibility, not something dictated by one person's convenience. Moreover, when you delay your response, it gives the man an opportunity to reflect on his own intentions and approach. If he's truly interested and values the connection, he will respect your pace and be willing to wait for your reply. On the other hand, if his interest is superficial or fleeting, your delayed response might reveal his true motivations. This clarity can help you make more informed decisions about how to proceed in the relationship, saving you time and emotional energy in the long run. Taking your time to respond also reinforces the idea that your life is full and engaging regardless of his presence. This is an attractive quality, as it shows that you are not relying on the interaction for validation or fulfillment. People are drawn to those who are self-assured and have a sense of purpose. By maintaining your pace and not rushing to respond, you communicate that you are a whole and complete individual, not someone waiting to be completed by another person's attention. Delaying your response is not about playing games or manipulating the other person. It's about honoring your own time and setting the tone for healthy communication. It's about recognizing that you have the power to shape the dynamic of the interaction and that you deserve to be respected and valued for who you are. By taking a step back and allowing space between the man's message and your reply, you establish yourself as a confident, independent individual who values her time and expects the same respect in return. When a man contacts you, it can be tempting to immediately pour your emotions into the conversation, especially if you've been eagerly anticipating the interaction. However, letting your emotions take center stage in your response can often lead to unintended consequences. While expressing yourself is important, leading with raw emotion can make you appear impulsive, overly attached, or even desperate. It's critical to approach the interaction with a sense of composure and balance, ensuring that your emotional state doesn't overshadow your self-respect or the dynamics of the conversation. When you let your emotions guide your response, you risk exposing vulnerabilities prematurely. Vulnerability, when shared in the right context and at the right time, can strengthen a connection and build trust. But when it is given without the foundation of mutual respect and understanding, it can leave you feeling exposed or even exploited. A man who contacts you may not always have intentions aligned with yours, and leading with emotion could make it easier for him to manipulate the situation to his advantage. By maintaining emotional control, you protect yourself from scenarios where your openness might be misunderstood or misused. Strong emotional responses can also cloud your judgment. When emotions take the lead, rational thinking often takes a back seat, and you may find yourself saying things you didn't mean or agreeing to situations that don't align with your values or goals. For instance, if his message stirs feelings of excitement, longing, or even resentment, you might respond impulsively, giving more weight to those emotions than to what you truly want to convey. This can create misunderstandings and complicate the conversation in ways that might not have occurred if you had taken the time to process your feelings first. Another concern with emotional responses is the potential to overwhelm the other person. Men, like anyone else, can sometimes feel pressured or uncertain when faced with a flood of emotions, especially early in a conversation. If he reaches out and your immediate reply is emotionally charged, whether positive or negative, it can shift the tone of the interaction, potentially causing discomfort or confusion. Instead, maintaining a calm and measured approach allows the conversation to unfold naturally, giving both parties the space to engage thoughtfully and meaningfully. Keeping your emotions in check doesn't mean suppressing them or being inauthentic. It's about choosing when and how to express them in a way that aligns with your intentions. This approach enables you to communicate with clarity and purpose, ensuring that your words reflect your values and priorities rather than fleeting emotional states. By doing so, you project confidence and emotional maturity, qualities that are not only attractive but also essential for healthy and balanced relationships. When you prioritize emotional control, you also send a subtle yet powerful message about your self-worth. It shows that you are not easily swayed by external circumstances or other people's actions. Instead, you operate from a place of stability and self-assurance, signaling that your emotions are yours to manage and not something that can be dictated by another person's outreach. This sense of inner strength can be incredibly compelling as it demonstrates that you are in control of your own narrative. Taking time to process your emotions before responding also allows you to consider the context of the conversation. Ask yourself, why is he reaching out? What is the tone of his message? Does his contact align with his previous behavior, or does it seem out of character? By reflecting on these questions, you can approach the interaction with a clearer perspective, ensuring that your response is informed by the situation rather than dictated by your immediate feelings. Maintaining emotional control also helps you avoid the trap of over-explaining or oversharing. When emotions run high, there's often a temptation to explain yourself, justify your actions, or share more than is necessary. This can shift the dynamic of the conversation, making you appear overly eager to gain his approval or validation. Instead, a composed and concise response communicates that you are confident in yourself and do not feel the need to explain or defend your choices. This reinforces your independence and self-respect, qualities that are essential for a balanced and fulfilling relationship. Additionally, controlling your emotions allows you to respond to his message on your own terms. If his contact triggers a strong emotional reaction, whether positive or negative, take a moment to pause and center yourself. This pause gives you the opportunity to decide how you want to proceed rather than reacting instinctively. It puts you in the driver's seat of the conversation, ensuring that your response reflects your true intentions rather than a momentary emotional surge. Learning to manage your emotions in communication also cultivates a sense of self-discipline. It challenges you to pause, reflect, and act deliberately rather than being swept away by immediate feelings. This discipline can have a ripple effect, enhancing not only your interactions with others, but also your overall emotional intelligence and resilience. Over time, it becomes easier to recognize and regulate your emotions, allowing you to engage in conversations with a greater sense of confidence and clarity. Practicing emotional control doesn't mean distancing yourself from your feelings or becoming detached. It's about creating a healthy balance between emotional expression and rational thought. This balance allows you to connect with others authentically while maintaining your sense of self. It ensures that your emotions serve as a guide rather than a master, empowering you to navigate conversations with grace and intention. In doing so, you create space for mutual respect and understanding, laying the groundwork for meaningful and fulfilling interactions. When a man contacts you, it's crucial to remember the significance of setting boundaries. Boundaries are not about pushing people away, rather, they're about defining how you wish to be treated and what you're willing to accept in your interactions. They serve as the framework for healthy relationships, ensuring mutual respect and understanding. Yet many overlook their importance, especially when emotions run high and the desire to connect clouds judgment. Failing to establish clear boundaries can lead to situations where your needs, values, and even your sense of self become compromised. Boundaries are essential for maintaining self-respect. When you allow someone to overstep your limits, you inadvertently send the message that your feelings and needs are secondary. This can set a dangerous precedent, especially in the early stages of communication, where the dynamics of the relationship are being formed. If a man reaches out to you and you respond without asserting your boundaries, he may assume that you are willing to accommodate his behavior, even if it's disrespectful or inconsiderate. Over time, this can lead to an imbalanced relationship where your needs are consistently overlooked. Establishing boundaries is not about being rigid or unapproachable, it's about being clear about what you value. For example, if a man contacts you at odd hours or with messages that lack genuine intent, responding immediately or engaging without addressing the behavior can reinforce the idea that such actions are acceptable. Instead, consider the tone, timing, and content of his messages before replying. If something doesn't sit well with you, it's perfectly acceptable to communicate that in a calm and composed manner. By doing so, you establish the expectation that your time, emotions, and energy deserve respect. Boundaries also help prevent the erosion of your identity. In the excitement of reconnecting with someone or engaging in a new conversation, it's easy to lose sight of your own priorities and values. You might find yourself making exceptions, ignoring red flags, or compromising your standards in an effort to maintain the connection. However, each time you do this, you chip away at the foundation of your self-worth. When you set and uphold boundaries, you remind yourself and others that your identity and integrity are non-negotiable. The act of setting boundaries is also a test of mutual respect. A man who truly values you will recognize and honor your boundaries, even if they challenge his initial expectations. He will see them as an extension of your self-respect and appreciate your willingness to stand firm in your beliefs. On the other hand, someone who resists or disregards your boundaries may not have your best interests at heart. In this sense, boundaries serve as a filter, helping you identify who is genuinely invested in building a meaningful connection and who is not. Enforcing boundaries requires clarity and consistency. It's not enough to define your limits internally, you must also communicate them effectively. This can be challenging, especially if you fear that asserting your boundaries might lead to conflict or rejection. However, it's important to remember that those who truly value you will appreciate your honesty and strength. Clear communication doesn't have to be confrontational. It can be as simple as stating, "I value my time and prefer not to engage in conversations late at night." Or, "I appreciate direct communication and would like our conversations to reflect that the key is to express your boundaries calmly and assertively without anger or defensiveness." Another critical aspect of boundaries is the ability to say no. Saying no is often misunderstood as a negative or hostile act, but in reality, it's an essential part of maintaining your autonomy and self-respect. When a man contacts you and asks for something that doesn't align with your values or priorities, it's important to feel confident in declining. Whether it's an invitation to meet under inconvenient circumstances or a request that feels too demanding, your ability to say no reinforces your boundaries and protects your well-being. Setting boundaries also extends to emotional availability. When a man contacts you, it's natural to want to be open and supportive. However, overextending yourself emotionally can lead to burnout and resentment, especially if the dynamic becomes one-sided. By establishing limits on how much emotional energy you're willing to invest, you ensure that your needs are met as well. This doesn't mean shutting yourself off from meaningful connections. Rather, it means being mindful of how much you give and ensuring that it's reciprocated. Boundaries are not static. They can evolve over time as relationships deepen and circumstances change. What's important is that you remain attuned to your feelings and adjust your boundaries as needed. For instance, if a man consistently demonstrates respect and consideration, you may feel comfortable relaxing certain boundaries to foster greater intimacy. Conversely, if his behavior becomes inconsistent or disrespectful, it may be necessary to reinforce or even tighten your limits. It's also worth noting that boundaries are not just about managing external interactions, they're about cultivating a healthy relationship with yourself. When you respect your own boundaries, you reinforce your sense of self-worth and develop a deeper understanding of your needs and desires. This self-awareness empowers you to navigate relationships with confidence and clarity, ensuring that your interactions align with your values and aspirations. One of the challenges of setting boundaries is dealing with the fear of losing the connection. It's natural to worry that asserting your limits might push someone away. However, it's important to remember that relationships built on a foundation of mutual respect and understanding are far more enduring and fulfilling than those based on unbalanced dynamics. By setting boundaries, you create a space where genuine connections can flourish, free from manipulation or resentment. Boundaries also contribute to emotional safety. When you know that your needs and values are respected, you can engage in conversations and relationships with a greater sense of security and trust. This emotional safety is essential for fostering meaningful connections, as it allows you to be open and vulnerable without fear of being taken advantage of or misunderstood.